We have an interest in you and your business, so we're running these weekly business lunchtime talks. So let's together see how we can put the Bible back into business. My name is Trevor Boyd, and you can find out more about us by visiting First Rathfriland Presbyterian Church YouTube channel. You can click down on the subscribe button to stay in touch and to get our weekly updates. Today we're coming to think again about this man called Daniel and his leadership under the title Facing the Lion's Den. And to set the scene, we're going to turn to the book of Daniel and read from chapter 6, verses 10 to 16. It says, "Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day, and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, The thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. So they answered and said before the king, that Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he laboured till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed. So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you." This is the famous story of Daniel and the lion's den. Last week when we met, we learnt that Daniel's colleagues had plotted against him, and now that plan was about to fit into place. And verse 10 that we read from clearly states that Daniel knew that the deal had been done. He knew what lay ahead of him. Anyone who prayed to anyone or anything other than King Darius would be thrown into the den of lions. But that didn't stop Daniel. He continued with his regular routine, praying 3 times a day. He didn't try to hide what he was doing either. Anyone could look through his window and see him praying as normal to God. His workmates came along and saw what he was doing, and they went and they told the boss that Daniel had broken the rules and that he should be punished. He should be punished by being thrown into the den of lions. His fellow workers, they must have hated him an awful lot to basically call for his death, because how could any human expect to survive an audience with the hungry lions? When the king was given this news about Daniel, he became very annoyed with himself. We see the pain of the king, which is in sharp contrast to the glee of his trusted officials. The king was able to see that he had been manipulated by his advisors in such a way as to bring about the death of an honest and upright man of God. And we know from the reading that the king was truly upset, because he did all that he rightfully could to get Daniel off the hook, but there just was no way around it. Significantly, this chapter 6, sets up a test of faith based on prayer itself. We must have faith to believe that God hears our prayers and that God answers our prayers. In Daniel's case, though, the very act of kneeling before God was a test of his faith. If you want to think about the book of Daniel that we've been working through, it's a record of Daniel and his companions Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, and how they remained loyal and true to God and their faith during and through a variety of testing situations. Way back in chapter 1, Daniel and his friends, well, they refused to eat and drink the king's food, and they were exonerated by the favour of God. Then other challenges that followed included the interpretation of dreams in chapters 2 and 4. It involved the golden image and the fiery furnace in chapter 3. It involved the handwriting on chapter 5. And in each case, the followers of God, Daniel and his friends, prevailed over kings, idol worshippers, and magicians. The book of Daniel, we could say, records men disputing the superiority or the sovereignty of God. Eventually, in verse 16, King Darius gave the command. He gave the command for Daniel to be thrown to the lions. Sometimes we use the terminology in the same context. We talk about throwing someone under the bus. It's used to signify that the person was sacrificed to save the reputation of the company or senior management as the scapegoat for a major decision that went wrong. We can see that King Darius, he was between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, he wanted to do what was right and obey the rule that he had made. On the other hand, he wanted Daniel to escape, or he wanted Daniel's life to be preserved. He didn't want Daniel to die. It's estimated that at this stage, Daniel was at least 70 years old. And even as Darius watched the stone being rolled across the lion's den and the seal applied, he said to Daniel, "Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you." Darius still had a hope that Daniel would come through this. And the king was so upset and so annoyed that he couldn't sleep that night. And first thing in the morning, he went to the den. And in hope and in expectation, Darius called out to Daniel in the den of lions. And what a joy it must have been for Darius when in verse 21, the voice of Daniel replied, "O king, live forever." And then Daniel went on to explain how God had shut the lions' mouths because Daniel was innocent before God. Daniel was obedient to God, who is the King of Kings. And in this book, the God of Israel is showing and proving that he is King of Kings and that he is superior to anyone else who thinks that they have power. Indeed, the kings during Daniel's reign, just as in any country, are put on the throne and removed from the throne by Almighty God. When it comes to prayer, prayer should have an important place in all of our lives and indeed in the life of our business. Daniel, we sing the song how he prayed 3 times every day. Daniel prayed regularly each day. And prayer is a crucial act of faith in this chapter 6 that we read from. When you stop to look at how Daniel prayed, it's interesting because we note that in his prayer, Daniel prays towards Jerusalem. Jerusalem at this stage is a city that had been leveled by the Babylonians who had taken Daniel into captivity and the people of Israel. Daniel not only prays towards a city that has been leveled, but Daniel prays towards a temple that is no longer standing. Daniel's actions clearly show that he was no longer living in the promised land, nor was the city of Jerusalem, nor even the temple of God in existence. And all of these were vital landmarks, vital places in the life of the Israelites like Daniel. They'd all been wiped out, they'd been all demolished. Daniel's prayer demonstrates to us what really matters is wholehearted dedication to God himself. And that is the core of real faith. That is a fitting response to the enemies in this book who defied the true God and who persecuted his people. It's a true response today. In whatever situation we find ourselves, no matter how difficult it looks, we're called to pray and to take it to God in prayer. These are all fitting things to remember, especially in situations when God allows our property to be taken away, just as the Israelites seen the promised land being taken from them as they went into captivity. It's a fitting thing to remember that when God allows our business to crumble, or as we're seeing, our church to be closed, the most important thing for us is our personal relationship with God, our personal faith in Jesus Christ. And that relationship requires us to communicate with God in prayer. So let's together put the Bible back into business. So we see you the same time, the same place next week. Bye for now.